They always said the land remembered everything. Every boot that crushed its dust, every hand that took more than it earned, every act done in silence and buried under habit. And Caleb Rourke had lived long enough on that ranch to believe it, though he'd spent most of his life pretending otherwise, pretending that power was the same as ownership and that silence meant consent. Because out there beyond the fences, far from the town that only whispered his name with fear or favor, rules bent easy and consequences took longer to arrive, and when they did, they never knocked first. They came like weather, sudden and merciless. And this story begins on a morning so quiet, it felt staged. The sun climbing slow, cattle breathing steam into the cold air. The kind of morning that makes a man feel untouchable, especially a man like Caleb, who had inherited not just acres of land, but a mindset carved deep by generations before him, a belief that anything within reach was his to use, shape, or break, a belief that the weak existed to be leaned on, that warnings were just noise made by people who lacked the nerve to act. And when old Ezekiel, the last ranch hand who still spoke in proverbs and looked at the ground, like it might answer back, told him once, "Don't take advantage of what can't fight you, and don't force your will where it don't belong," Caleb laughed. Because men like him always laughed before they learned. And learning was coming, though not the way stories usually tell it. Because this wasn't about a single mistake. It was about a pattern. A line crossed so many times it disappeared. About entitlement fed daily until it mistook itself for destiny. And the ranch itself had watched it all. The fences, the barns, the animals. The quiet things people assume don't notice. And when Caleb made his final choice that morning, careless and cruel in a way that felt routine to him, the land did what it had always done. It kept the record and something ancient stirred. Not supernatural, not mystical, but far more terrifying, the slow, collective response of consequences delayed, and as the sun rose higher, the rancher who thought himself king didn't see the storm forming. Because storms don't always gather in the sky. Sometimes they gather in memory, in resentment, in the eyes of those who stayed silent too long. And as Caleb walked back toward the house, boots heavy with confidence, he didn't notice how the wind had changed, how the animals had gone still, how even the crows refused to land. And this is the moment where viewers should understand something clearly, because this story isn't just about one man on one ranch. It's about what happens when warnings are ignored, when power is abused, when lines are crossed because someone thinks they can get away with it. And if you're feeling that tension right now, if you sense what's coming but can't yet see it, that's no accident. Because stories like this unfold slowly before they explode, and if you want to hear what happens when the ranch finally answers back, when fury follows choice, when silence breaks, you already know what to do. Subscribe now, because the next chapter is where everything burns. Fury doesn't announce itself with noise at first. It tightens, it focuses, it waits. And by the time Caleb realized something was wrong, it had already surrounded him. Not as a mob, not as a monster, but as inevitability, the kind that makes a man feel small inside his own skin. Because the ranch that once felt like an extension of his body had turned unfamiliar. Paths seemed longer, doors heavier, eyes everywhere. And the first thing to go was control. Subtle at first. A gate left open that shouldn't have been. A horse that refused his command. A hand who quit without notice, and left behind a look that said more than words ever could. And then the story started. Whispers traveling faster than trucks, of what Caleb had done, of how long it had gone on, of warnings ignored and lines crossed. And once the truth breathes, it doesn't go back into hiding, it spreads, it sharpens. And the people who once looked away stop doing so, because silence protects abusers until it doesn't. And when the reckoning came, it wasn't cinematic in the way movies lie about. It was messy, human, relentless. It came in the form of witnesses, of evidence, of memories shared out loud for the first time, of the land itself giving up what it had seen through broken boards and muddy tracks. And Caleb, the man who believed strength meant taking, learned too late that real strength is restraint, that respect isn't demanded. It's earned, and the title of this story, the warning baked into it, wasn't a joke or shock bait. It was a line drawn in bloodless truth. Don't take advantage. Don't force what isn't yours. Don't stick your will where it doesn't belong. Because fury always follows. Not as revenge, but as balance. And by the end, when the ranch stood quiet again, emptier but cleaner somehow, when the wind moved through the grass without carrying fear, the lesson remained heavier than any sentence a court could pass. A lesson meant for anyone watching, listening, thinking they're untouchable, thinking rules don't apply to them, thinking silence is permission. And if this story stirred something in you, if it made you uncomfortable, angry, reflective, that's because it's supposed to. Stories like this don't exist to entertain alone. They exist to warn, and more stories like this are coming. Deeper, darker, truer. So subscribe to the channel, stay with us, because the next story might not be about a ranch, but the lesson will be the same. And fury never misses its mark. People think the story ends when the powerful fall, when the gates close, when the name stops being spoken with fear, but that's never how it really works. Because what lingers is not the downfall, but the echo. And the ranch carried echoes like scars you don't see until the weather changes. And months after Caleb Rourke was gone, after the dust settled and the paperwork dried and the town pretended it had always known better, the land still felt different. Lighter in some places, raw in others, like it was relearning how to breathe without permission. And those who remained felt it too. The hands who stayed. The families who returned to ground they once avoided. The animals that no longer flinched at sudden movement. Because abuse doesn't just end when the abuser leaves. It leaves habits behind, flinches, silences, gaps where trust used to be, and rebuilding is slower than destruction ever was. Quieter too, but far more honest. And into that quiet stepped Mara Hale. Not a savior, not a hero carved from myth. Just a woman who understood boundaries because life had taught her the cost of crossing them, who walked the ranch not as an owner but as a steward, listening more than she spoke, fixing what could be fixed and leaving alone what needed time. And some nights she'd sit on the porch and swear the land itself was watching her, waiting to see if this time would be different. Because places remember patterns, and trust is earned the same way it's lost. Through repetition and slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. Fences stood straighter. Workers spoke louder. Laughter returned without checking who might overhear. And the lesson settled deep into the bones of the place. A lesson written not in signs or slogans, but in how people moved. How they asked before taking. How they stopped assuming silence meant yes. And that's the part of the story people don't like to tell. Because it puts responsibility back where it belongs. Not just on the one who did wrong, but on everyone who benefits from looking away. And when travelers passed through and asked about the ranch, the answers were careful, not defensive. Honest without being cruel. Because truth doesn't need exaggeration to hurt. And the warning carried forward not as gossip, but as principle. Don't take advantage. Don't force yourself where you don't belong. Because the fury that follows isn't just punishment. It's collapse. It's rot. It's everything you built turning against you. And if you're listening to this thinking it couldn't be you, that's exactly where these stories begin. With certainty, with entitlement, with the belief that power is permission, but power without restraint is just violence with paperwork. And the land, the people, the quiet witnesses always keep count. So if this chapter feels slower, heavier, it's because aftermath is where truth lives. Not in explosions, but in rebuilding. And more chapters are coming. Stories about consequences that don't fade. About warnings ignored until it's too late. About the thin line between control and cruelty. So if you want to stay ahead of the silence, if you want stories that don't flinch from the lesson, subscribe to the channel because what comes next may sound familiar. And that's the most dangerous part of all.